Welcome to the MTA Podcast Series, a weekly audio cast featuring interviews with recognized industry professionals. And your host, Ed Carlson.
It's Wednesday evening, February 10th, 2010. Regular listeners know we normally record these podcasts on Tuesday mornings. Well, it's 5 p.m. here in Seattle, and for Shane, it's 8 p.m. in New York City. But it's morning somewhere in the world, and indeed, it's morning in Hong Kong. And from Hong Kong, today's guest from Bloomberg Television is Bernie Lo. Bernie Lo is based in Hong Kong and anchors Bloomberg Television's pan-regional primetime morning business and financial news show, Bloomberg Live. He also hosts Asia's only daily regional talk show, Bloomberg Voices. Prior to joining Bloomberg Television in 2004, he was the chief stocks editor, anchor, and talk show host at CNBC Asia for nearly 10 years. Previously, Mr. Lo held a variety of on-air positions with Singapore Broadcasting, TVB, and ATV. Mr. Lo holds a bachelor's degree in liberal arts from the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, and a Master of Sciences degree in Fine Arts Administration from the University of Moscow, Idaho. Bernie Lo, welcome to the program.
Ed, pleasure to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, we're just delighted to have you here with us today. So you're from my neighborhood, the Pacific Northwest.
Absolutely, yeah. Grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, after being born in Vancouver, BC. I was born to university lecturers, and as such, we ended up hopping from one college town to another. So I was at Corvallis, Oregon. I kind of spread my roots and grew up as a kid there for the first 11, 12 years of my life, where my parents were teaching at Oregon State. And then one day, Dad decided to uproot everybody and move closer to the relatives in Vancouver, and decided that Tacoma, Washington, All-America City, thank you very much, 1983, 84, was a perfect place to be. That was in the late 70s. We didn't know it was going to be an All-America City, but it certainly developed into one, and that's where I spent the next decade or so before heading off into college and university.
I see. And now you're an American working in Hong Kong. First question is, how's your Guangdong Hua, or your Chinese?
Well, interestingly, it's my first language because my parents had just left Hong Kong for no more than about a year or so when I was born. So I grew up in a Cantonese-speaking household with the grandparents and uncles and aunts around. I didn't actually learn to speak English till I was about 5 years old. You know, we tended to start school later. Back then, we didn't start at, with Montessori and all the stuff at 3 years, 4 years old. We kind of stuck around home, and Mom kind of, schooled us in the ways of, getting things done around the house. So I didn't actually really pick up English until 5 or 6. But then, once you go into the public school system in Corvallis, Oregon, all of a sudden you want to be like everybody around you, and Cantonese kind of goes downhill very rapidly. So when I got here after grad school at the University of Idaho, when I arrived here 20 years ago, it was very rusty, and I was using generation-old vocabulary, and people were having their yucks at me as a result.
Well, so do you have American citizenship or Hong Kong?
Actually Canadian. I was born in Vancouver, and when I turned 18, as the case was at that time when you didn't have, situations of dual nationality, INS at the time, Immigration and Naturalization, comes to you and they say, okay, you've been on a green card for all this time as a permanent resident of the USA. Do you wish to become an American citizen? It was at that point that they had just started to bring back selective service registration because they were worried that the volunteer forces, the numbers were dwindling, and Mom was really scared that I have to go fight. I'd have to, pick up an M16 and go fighting in some foreign land in the Middle East for big oil companies. And she said, why don't you stay Canadian for a while and see how this pans out? And as it were, for taxation issues, Canada doesn't levy taxes on you outside of its borders. It's actually worked in my favor, so it's been sort of a blessing in disguise, but I didn't foresee it at that time.
Well, now you're in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong and China is what we want to talk about today. On a personal note, 20 years ago, I spent a year in China, and I'll tell you, at that time, we were all looking forward with some trepidation to the year 2000 when China would take over Hong Kong from the Brits. At that time, some of us were convinced anyway that Hong Kong might be the pill that China couldn't swallow, and Hong Kong would actually end up influencing the PRC more than the other way around. Well, it's been 10 years since then, since the turnover. What's the consensus view now, or does anybody even talk about it? Have things changed so much?
Well, as you might remember, the cover shot of a Fortune magazine article a couple of years before the handover in 1997, and basically it brazenly trumpeted the death of Hong Kong, once it left more than a century and a half of British colonial rule and was handed back to the rulers in Beijing. There was a lot of stuff going on then. There were a lot of people leaving Hong Kong, trying to, aim for Sydney, Australia, Toronto,
Vancouver.
But basically, you got to have a safety valve somewhere.
Right.
But time has told us. I was here in the run up to the handover. I've been here for the decade and a couple of years after the handover. But then you notice that you don't have a Union Jack flying all over the place anymore. You don't get the British troops, at the naval base here. You get the Chinese troops, but you don't see them in the community. You do get the Bauhinia flag, and more people speak Mandarin. There's a certain metamorphosis. There's a certain metamorphosis which has gone on here. There's a certain Chinification of Hong Kong, if you will. Part of the deal was back in '97 during the handover that to sort of slowly blur the border. Hong Kong would start letting in 150 mainland arrivals in Hong Kong. They'd like to move, with the proper immigration visas and everything. So you do the math. I can't do the math that quickly. I'm not that smart. But 150 times 365 days a year times, 12, 13 years, you have a much more substantial Mandarin-speaking and Mandarin bankrolled money presence in Hong Kong than ever. And, by allowing the mainland money in, by allowing the direct investment in, it's held the property market up, it's kept the stock market rolling along, rough and tumble at times. But really widely seen as, thank God for China. If it wasn't for China, we might become another city in Asia, but it's because of the increasing links across the increasingly blurry border, which has allowed us to prosper. And we have our role. Shanghai has its role. It's coming up as a financial center. But, when people come to Hong Kong, they say, the British cultural past, the rule of law, common law, the development of the society, leads a lot of companies to set up the headquarters here as a doorstep, as sort of a launching pad into China. So I'd say apart from being a parasitic kind of relationship, it's a very symbiotic relationship between the two sides.
Oh, that's great. That's great for the people. You said, thank God for China. You know what? Let's talk about needing China. It seems like everyone is hoping for an increase in consumption by Chinese consumers because that's going to save the world economy. From what I read, currently household consumption in China is about 35% of GDP versus U.S. households at 70%. And so there's a long ways to a lot of potential growth there. But the stimulus packages that the Chinese government introduced to counter the global recession, it sounds like they've had an unfortunate side effect of actually acting against getting the Chinese consumer up and running at something a little closer, approximating their U.S. counterparts, in that a lot of that money, that stimulus money, actually found its way into export-oriented sectors and infrastructure projects. The consequence being that the stimulus has actually exacerbated overcapacity in Chinese manufacturing and increased pressure on Chinese firms to export, which is the exact opposite of what the world was hoping for at least 6 months ago. Bernie Lowe, can the Chinese consumer really save the world economy?
Well, this was the question that was asked way back when China announced a nearly 4 trillion renminbi or yuan stimulus program, and China kind of recoiled at that. It's like, whoa, where did this come from? It's like we've got our own set of problems here. We've got a so-called Gini coefficient. We've got a wealth divide between people who live in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and the middle provinces, the western provinces. We have great wealth inequality. We've got social issues here. We've got so many domestic programs, and now you want us to save the world by picking up everything that Americans don't want to buy at Kohl's or Walmart anymore. I mean, they really recoiled in fear at the not fear, but sort of in shock. That sort of, that anybody raised the question, can China save everything? What happened was, like many programs of this nature, they saw what was coming. They knew that a big slowdown was coming. And they decided, okay, we have the means to stick trillions of renminbi into the system. The problem was, you're right, a lot of it made it into the wrong places. A lot of it went into property speculation. There were some estimates that up to 20% or even more of the bank lending at one time that was generated was going into stock speculation. Exact opposite of what they wanted. What they wanted people to do was upgrade their lifestyles. Buy a starter home if you're living in, rental housing or something like that, or upgrade to middle income housing if you're living in entry level homes or apartments in China. That's what they wanted them to do, and a certain amount of the money went into into keeping the consumer momentum going. Last part of last year, we saw car sales rocketing by like 60, 70, 80% a month from where they were a year previously. So a lot of the money is going into goods and durables and things that people need, but there's a lot of internal sort of checks and balances and new oversight coming in right now. The banks have been told, okay, that was enough. We'll pull back. Rein into lending a little bit, because you banks are throwing out way too much money out there. The multiplier effect, the velocity is increasing at a really unsustainable pace. So there's been a lot of signals sent down from the national government, from the provincial governments to banks, in their domains. You got to pull back on this a little bit, let it settle down. You got to keep an eye on things like consumer and wholesale prices because they're running ahead a lot stronger than they are in other parts of Asia as well. There's no way you can stick trillions of whatever currency you're talking about and not have some sort of asset price inflation, which is something they're trying to massage down without leading to an outright crash in these markets, because that obviously could lead to a lot of mass discontent.
Well, that's right. And, the financial crisis, it caused a significant slowdown in China, but the economy actually never really contracted. But as I understand it, because both Chinese and Hong Kong economies are further along in the recovery phases than the U.S., and because they both peg their currencies to the dollar, although in different ways, current U.S. monetary policy is likely to be excessively stimulatory for those economies. And, moreover, officials in both places are concerned about the prospects of dollar depreciation because they're both large holders of dollar-denominated assets, particularly U.S. treasuries. Well, what's the future for the yuan or renminbi?
Well, the renminbi has been basically locked down at a very, very stable pitch against the U.S. dollar for some time now. I believe it's almost 2 years, or if not longer at this point, at about 6.8, 6.82. That in itself, though, is quite a dramatic improvement from where it was, half a decade ago. Up until summer of 2005, it was, and this is kind of funny, but this is, numerology plays a big role in Chinese culture. At that time, the actual stated rate, the fixed rate, was 828, okay? Now, number 8 in Chinese sounds very, very similar to the word meaning to get rich. So 828 to the Chinese can be loosely translated as you get richer and it's easy to get richer and richer. So, for some reason somebody decided, that's what it's going to be. Maybe it was arbitrary at 828, but you've gone from 828 to 6.8. Really, it's a one-way bet to the moon. I mean, nobody in this that I've talked to in the last 3 years has argued that the renminbi is overvalued and should weaken. If anything, it's got to strengthen. And so whether it's going to be 6.5 or 6 or 5.8 is really anybody's guess, but the directional preponderance is quite clear. The reason you don't have everybody parking every single penny that they have into renminbi is because the returns are relatively low, and if your holding costs are holding on for 12 months, 18 months, 24 months at a very, very low interest rate means that your opportunity cost that you forego by going with other alternatives makes it a little bit untenable. Now, lately, as far as the currency goes, I think Greece and the whole Eurozone problem seem to have taken the headlines, and the dollar has rebounded rather nicely. So you don't hear so much talk about the secular death or the secular decline of the U.S. dollar. But down the line, what you're obviously going to see, Chinese have the renminbi fixed at a certain rate. The Hong Kong dollar peg has been in place since 1983, for overriding reasons of stability. At some point, you're doing trade between Hong Kong and China, not so much Hong Kong and the U.S., China to the U.S., but really Hong Kong and China will have to merge their currencies. At some point, there's going to be a stronger relationship. But the people who run this place here in Hong Kong say, obviously you can't do that. This is supposed to be the freest economy in the world.
Right.
You can't link it to a non-convertible currency. So until the day that the Chinese make it fully convertible, they become 100%, free to market type economy. That's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Bernie, let's shift gears here for a while. Time marches on our podcast, and our time is limited. Shane informed me right before we started this podcast today that we've received a compliment perhaps from the People's Republic of China in that after being freely accessible to the Chinese people, our podcasts have just recently been put on the hit list. That is, no longer are they available in the People's Republic of China.
Oh dear.
Isn't that something? And if you need to get off this call immediately, just let us know.
I'm okay. I haven't seen anybody show up at my door yet. Keep talking.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, anyway, that's my lead-in for this next news item. China has been accused of a coordinated attack on Google servers in an attempt to gather information on human rights activists. So what's the story today over there? Is Google pulling out of China? Will Google's newsmaking do anything to alter censorship policies in China? What sort of restrictions does Bloomberg labor under, similar to Google's problems, if any? Give us some background.
Yeah, well, from my perch, because what we do is, we're not really political television. We give people the nuts and bolts on the markets, and you can't lie about capital values in the financial market. So it tends to be pretty crystal clear as far as the kind of information, the kind of topics, the kind of the genres which we make part of our daily menu here. As far as what's going on with the whole the issue of censorship and how heavy-handed or not heavy-handed is the government in China, you have to talk to different people. I mean, one of the most critical voices that you heard on the flip side of Google's allegations, and then they're throwing down the gauntlet to China, saying, well, if we can't do unfiltered search for all the people in China, we're just going to pull out. Making a grand statement like that. None other than Bill Gates, just down the road from you there. He was saying basically, well, censorship, you have to look at it from a multifaceted view. And people have different standards, and people have different, people have, that hold censorship to different thresholds. They rate it according to thresholds. He said that, as far as they're concerned, China has done minimal stuff, and there's only so much you can do. There are always ways around these dams. There's always ways around these filters. In the end, that's the whole idea. That's the whole notion of technological innovation. So China is a one-party system at this point, and they have, throughout history, maybe because of their history, they have reasons for wanting to exact a certain element of control over the kind of information which floats out there. I mean, in the past few years, we've seen eruptions, sometimes religious, sometimes racial, whether it's Xinjiang and the Uyghurs, or whether it's the issue of Tibet. Every time the world leader meets with the Dalai Lama, Beijing's feathers get all ruffled. It's a slow process, evolution, of freedom of access to the net and that sort of thing in China. But for right now, they're maintaining a certain modicum of censorship over the system. There's been no heavy-handed pronouncement on Google from either side right now. In fact, Eric Schmidt, in the weeks after, the kind of launching that bomb onto the market, was saying, well, we hope we can find a way to stay in China. It'd be really nice to stay in, one of the world's fastest, if not the fastest growing internet market. So a certain level of compromise seems to be going on there. You haven't heard a lot from Google itself. They seem to be, sort of hunkered down in talks with the Chinese. Whole-scale extrication is probably not the answer. Constructive engagement on what level with what limit seems to be sort of the buzz about the discussions going on now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Bernie, in the 2 minutes we've got left, here's a somewhat introspective question for you. What do you think is the most important issue brewing in Asia that Americans are unaware of?
Wow, that's a wide one down the middle.
That's a big one.
What I would say is this. It's easy to think of Asia as the tropics or subtropics as the third world, but if you come out here and you see the kind of things that people are putting up, you see the kind of technological prowess which is growing exponentially, by the way. You see the engineering, architectural, and design expertise here, coupled with the fact that, you talked a bit earlier about, how we here in Hong Kong and China pretty much skirted the recession, as many Americans know it. A lot of that has to do with Confucian or Buddhist or whatever. I don't want to. It's not a really religious thing, but more of a cultural issue, and that is prudence, being able to take care of yourself. When I bought a home with my wife here in Hong Kong, we owned 3 homes. Each time we had to put 30% down. And, by virtue of savings and living frugally, we were able to put that 30% down each time without too much fuss. That means that people have a stake and equity in the homes that they surround themselves with. There's no such thing as, zero down conventional 30-year fix. There's no such thing as FHA, VA, 0% or 3 or 5% down. I mean, you basically lay a stake, a claim to your future here, and that's why you haven't had the kind of mortgage defaults either. The kind of money, the kind of savings that exist here, people in Asia don't spend on the scale of somebody living in a 4,000 square foot, 3-story home in Rochester. We don't have that kind of space. We live in some of the most congested places in the world, and by virtue of that, we're forced to choose. We're forced to choose what we purchase, what we choose to surround ourselves with, the size of the packages of toilet tissue that we buy. It's like enforced prudency on the people here. I would say watch out for the kind of spending power and the kind of consumer wherewithal in the years to come, because you see it exploding all around you. You go to Seoul, you go to Southeast Asia, Singapore, the place will amaze you. It's probably more first world than many parts of America itself. That's not a slag against America. That's just reality, being a global traveler.
It's just reality. I can tell you of all, I wouldn't consider myself a wide traveler, but I have spent time in Hong Kong. I thought it was the most exciting city in the world. A year ago, I had my first trip to Seoul, and I was absolutely amazed. I had no idea what was going on there, and it just blew me out of the water seeing that town, and what a town. Bernie Lowe, it has been great having you with us today. Is there anything else you'd like to mention before we conclude?
No, I just hope that, I just want to say to all my friends in Olympia, I haven't been on the campus for about 2 decades, but go, Gooey Duck, go. I hope, and hope the dogs do well in the upcoming seasons as well, because that's my family there. My kid brothers, both of them are UW grads, so I've got to be a dog and a Gooey Duck fan. What a combo, huh?
What a combo. And for our listeners, UW Dogs, that's the University of Washington. Well, that wraps up today's MTA podcast. Don't forget, next week from MKM Partners, we'll have Katie Stockton. From Seattle, I'm Ed Carlson. You can follow me at seattletechnicaladvisors.com or contact me at ed@seattletechnicaladvisors.com. Send us your comments and suggestions. Let's keep our stops tight. Good day.